my name is Toria, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to talk about my birth story. I gave birth to my little boy in August of 2021, so it's been 14 months, nearly 15. And while it's, easier to recall the details of your birth closer to the date you gave birth, I wasn't making videos at that time, so better late than never. I found during pregnancy it very helpful to watch birth stories to kind of get a feel of the different types that people might have, the good, the bad, the ugly, the everything in between. So I thought I would contribute my story to the mix. Now, a quick summary of what we're going to talk about so that you can decide if this video is for you or not, although you will have seen it in the title. I did not have the birth that I wanted. It is not the birth that I would have chosen. It is definitely not the kind of birth I will be doing again if I have a baby number 2. But it is the birth that I had, and that is a failed induction and an emergency cesarean. So before we get into what actually happened, we're going to go through my birth plan, or at least just like a quick summary of my birth plan. I actually have it here written out. I found a copy of it in my folder, the yellow folder that you all get in the UK here. So this is just what I wanted, my ideal situation with a few sort of, if this can't happen, this is the version I would like instead situation. So my plan was to have an unmedicated water birth at our hospital. They do have a birthing suite, water birthing suite, and had it been available and I was allowed to have it, then I would have used that. As I said, I also wanted it to be unmedicated. I was intending to use hypnobirthing and other relaxation techniques, so, meditation type things. So I'll just read a couple of the bits from this because I probably phrased it in pregnancy a lot better than I would now post-pregnancy. So, before we move on, I should mention that I have a couple of health conditions that did influence the care that I received. I have a heart condition and I had hip surgery a couple of years ago because I had a little spiky bit of my bone on my hip bone that was like tearing through the cartilage and just making me have a bad time. So because of that, I was under consultant care. I was seeing doctors for these conditions to make sure that everything would go smoothly, even though I had these going on. I did see my cardiologist. Cardiologist said, good to go. What is the word for a consultant doctor person in birth? Obstetrician. Obstetrician. So while my cardiologist said, we're good to go, you're not going to have a problem, my obstetrician was going, we might though. What if we do? What if we do? Don't like that. This is bad. We need to monitor you. But they weren't concerned about the hip at all because I have good mobility. So even though it could potentially cause me problems, actually during the birth I wouldn't have an issue. So they were happy with that. And of my health issues, those are the things that they were concerned about. Everything else was fine. I mean, I have perpetual low iron. So they just gave me iron supplements and we were good. Okay, moving on. Why was I induced? What caused it? And how did that go? So as I was approaching my due date, I had a few scans. I had one scan where my baby was measuring big, and then they have to do another scan after that to confirm whether the baby is looking to be big, and he was, but then they measured again, and he was looking small. And that got me doubting whether the scans are accurate at all. But because on that third scan he was measuring small, and my placenta was measuring small, they started to bring me in to discuss induction. So I saw my consultant again, well actually it wasn't my main consultant, it was another consultant within the hospital. And he basically said, for your baby's safety, we need to induce you. You have to decide today, please don't leave the hospital, decide within the next hour or two, go ahead and wander around, we want to do it tomorrow. And I said, that's very soon. Is it really that urgent? And he said, well, we could do it the day after. And I went, thank you very much, we'll do that then. I didn't want an induction. I did cry about the fact that they were telling me I needed to have an induction. And I did feel pressured into having an induction by the fact that he was saying it would be dangerous for my baby to not have an induction. Would it actually have been dangerous for my baby? I don't know. So I had that day to kind of come to terms with the fact that I was having induction, and I got on board with it. I was team induction. I was like, okay, if this is what's best for my baby, then we'll do the induction. And by the time we were heading in at 8 a.m. on Thursday, I was in good spirits about it. I felt pretty good about it. I thought, okay, a couple of days, we'll be home. Great, let's do this. A couple hours after we got there, they finally got the process going and they inserted the pessary, which is like a little tablety thing on a string. And then they left us to it for a while. I did start to get some contractions. They said they weren't contractions. Well, the consultant said they weren't contractions. The midwives agreed they were contractions, but they were very minor, very small, and things weren't really happening. So a few hours later, or maybe it was the next morning or in the middle of the night, it was probably the middle of the night, they did the next process, which I think was when they used the gel. So they inserted the gel and again, same experience. I had some minor contractions that the consultant told me weren't contractions, and the midwives thought that that was unfair of said consultant to say, because they were just small ones. And we did that 2 more times until finally on day three, I know, that morning, they moved us up to the labour ward. I was waiting and having these pessaries, gel things happening for 3 days. They came and visited me constantly to check the monitor thing, to see how things are going. Was my heart rate okay? Baby's heart rate okay? Were things progressing? I had a few cervical checks that were horribly painful. I've heard some people say, oh, when I see if I've got a doctor with big stubby hands, and I'm like, you know what, I would have preferred that, because the woman I had tiny hands. That was uncomfortable because she had to really, ram in there. I would not recommend that. And then, finally on day 3, after things not really going anywhere, I think I was 1 centimeter dilated, which is like nothing. We got moved up because they decided that at that point they had to step things up and they were going to break my waters. Again, from my birth plan, you might remember I didn't want my waters broken, but that plan's out the window at this point. So they move us around midday, we get up onto the labour ward, and then we're left to it for 24 hours. 24 hours. I was left alone with my husband, just the 2 of us, on the labour ward for 24 hours before they did something else, anything else. Occasionally someone will come in and say, oh, I'm so sorry that you're waiting so long, it's just so busy. And we would say, it's fine, don't worry, we understand, because we did, they're very busy. And my situation was lower priority to these other women. So 24 hours after being put on the labour ward and literally left alone, we finally got the process going. So that morning, the consultant from the night shift came in, and I was really grateful to see that it was the consultant I had seen prior to being told I needed an induction, and she was very understanding of kind of what I wanted, and she was very considerate. I liked her. The reason I saw her is she wanted to be the one to break my waters because she knew I'd been having a bit of a rough time. So she broke my waters, and then she went off shift. And as she was going, she said, hopefully I won't see you later, but if I do, we'll see where we can go from there. And then shift change, and the other consultant came in and she did another cervical check, and she said, you're only 1 centimeter, or maybe I was 2 at that point. And she said, this isn't going anywhere. It's probably not going to work, and you'll end up having a cesarean. Let's see where you are in a few hours, because that's going to help. I mean, the thing is, she was right. She was right. That is exactly what happened. But maybe don't tell the patient that it's not going to work. It kind of soured everything a bit. Can you tell I didn't like this one? So then I had a few hours with this delightful midwife who made everything feel better. She was wonderful. After a little bit, I'd had some gas and air, wasn't doing enough. So I'm on the Syntocin drip at this point, and they're starting to induce contractions, and I'm not having a good time. One of the things that I didn't know prior to going into an induction is because the contractions are forced, they aren't natural, they are worse. Didn't know that. Kind of wish I knew that. probably should have looked into that. So the contractions were a rough time and the gas and air wasn't cutting it. And my midwife offered me pethidine, I think it is, pethidine. This. And I had a few hours of an easy time. It was great. I felt okay. And we had a lot of conversations. I got very talkative. And then that wore off. And then I struggled again because you can't have it twice. And I still wanted to avoid an epidural at this point. Then comes shift change. And my wonderful midwife, who I wish I could have kept the whole time, had to leave. And I got another midwife in the room instead. She also had a student midwife with her who was absolutely lovely, really liked her. The midwife I wasn't quite so much a fan of, and I'll get into why in a minute. So she came in and everything was okay. I went to the loo, came back, and as I was getting onto the bed, I pulled out my cannula, which meant she had to reinsert my cannula. And the reason I'm not so much a fan of this woman is because when she struggled to put in the cannula, she said, "Oh, you bleed a lot." And I don't. I bleed a normal amount. She was just struggling to put it in. But rather than accept the fact that she was the one struggling, she blamed me. Sometime in the next few hours or next hour, I have no memory of time at this point. My time perception went way out of the window around now. Actually, probably a while back. Like, at some point during this fourth day. She must have asked me, because they have to ask your permission, but I have no memory of her asking me, to increase the Syntocin drip. So she increased it, and it was clearly too much of an increase because I had no break. It was contraction, and I was in so much pain. It was a bad time. During this entire process, by the way, do you remember from my birth plan, I said that I wanted to be able to move around? Well, because I was on the drip, and also because they wanted to monitor my heart because of my heart condition, and also because they needed to monitor my baby's heart, I was basically stuck on the bed. I couldn't go anywhere. I was where I was, and that was it. Technically, I could have stood up, but by the time the contractions were nonstop, I physically couldn't move anymore. I was just done. I was in the bed and that was it. And now it was sometime after the Syntocin drip had been increased that the lovely consultant came back. I really liked her. One of the reasons that I loved this consultant so much is that she had said in an appointment prior to induction being suggested that if she was the consultant on the ward when I went into labour, she had no problems with me not being monitored non-stop. She thought that me having a water birth, unmedicated, unmonitored, like my heart not being monitored, was absolutely fine. She said she couldn't guarantee that for other consultants, and I'm pretty sure she was spot on there. But if it was her, she had no issues with me having the kind of birth that I wanted. So she was team natural birth from the get-go, even though ultimately she ended up performing my cesarean. So this doctor comes in and she basically tells me that we're not getting anywhere and I'm exhausted at this point. She can see that I'm exhausted and she thinks that it is probably a good idea to stop and consider the option of a cesarean. Now, she suggested all of this while these contractions are kind of non-stop. So she told the midwives to turn the drip down to basically nothing. I was still getting some contractions, but she told them to drop it way back. And then she waited, and I have no idea how long she waited, but it felt like it was at least 20 minutes. And she just sat in this room and waited for me to be able to hold a conversation with her. At that point, we went through my options, which were basically to carry on and see if we can push through and get the baby to be born this way, or to stop where we are now, let my body come down from the Syntocin, and then go into the operating theatre and have a cesarean. After she discussed these options with us, she then left the room, the midwives left the room, and me and my husband discussed it. We agreed that at this point, I couldn't handle any more. It had been 4 days. I'd been having minor contractions for 3 of those days, and on the 4th day, I had reached a point where I was having no break from contractions. I lost count of the number of hours I was there, but it was 4 days. And we agreed that although a cesarean was absolutely not what I originally wanted, It was basically a silver lining at this point and was the best option for us. So we said, yes, please, cut me open. And cut me open they did. I have no idea how long it was between deciding I was going to have a cesarean and going to have a cesarean. I just know that they took me off the drip. My body kind of settled from the Syntocin, and I think we had to wait for one of the operating rooms to be available. Then once it was, we got wheeled in and got going. After the induction being such a bad experience, I was very happy to be having this cesarean, which fascinates me because I really didn't want a cesarean. Not that there's anything wrong with a cesarean. I am in fact now team cesarean, and while I would prefer to avoid one in the future, I would have no issues having one if I needed to. But one of the reasons I didn't initially want a cesarean is because within the last few years, I've already had 2 major surgeries. I had heart surgery just before I turned 30, and then I had hip surgery around, I think I was 32. So I wasn't really wanting to have a 3rd major surgery before the age of 35. And at that point, just after turning 33. That said, the cesarean went great. I thought that my surgical team was fantastic. I really liked them. The consultant who performed my surgery was brilliant. Really like her. She was so fast. I mean, they're all so fast. It's mind-blowing how fast they actually do the operation. So let's go through the process, how it kind of worked. So they wheeled me in. I was told to sit up. The anesthesiologist did the spinal tap. I barely felt anything. It was great. And then my whole body started to shake. The whole thing was just like... And that didn't stop for a while. They lay me back down, then they bring in the rest of the team. They put down like the curtain, the surgical team behind the curtain. My husband was behind with me. They had a midwife talking to me. They played the music that I wanted played during my labour, which was very sweet of them. You can have whatever you want. I had the Skyrim playlist because that is like my happy place music. So I don't know exactly how long it took, but I'm pretty sure that from making the first incision to showing me my baby took like a handful of minutes. It was so fast. They raised him up at the little curtain so that I could see his face, and then they quickly whipped him away, I think just to check he was okay. I'm not entirely sure. But moments later, he was on my chest because I had requested immediate skin to skin, and they honoured that. The moment my baby boy touched my skin, he stopped crying and I stopped shaking, and I swear that was one of the most magical moments of my life. I was crying, although my baby stopped crying, but I was crying. I think my husband was crying. We were just blown away by seeing this tiny human just in the world all of a sudden. We requested delayed cord clamping. That was actually something that's done by standard at my hospital, so they did honour that. And my husband got to cut the cord, which was really cool. And then I also requested that they didn't clean him off, so the vernix was kept on his skin when he was handed to me. They did bundle him up, of course. And then while all of this is happening, they're stitching me up. So I'm oblivious to the putting everything back in and stitching me up thing that they do, because I was holding my baby. They were doing baby things around me. And then once I was all stitched up, they got us out of the operating room and back into my labour room. So of the entire 4 days so far, the cesarean was absolutely the highlight, the silver lining, the little bit of joy that made everything feel okay. And in that whole process, I went from going so against me personally having a cesarean. Like I say, I know it's the correct choice for a lot of people, and it was for me in the end. But I went from not wanting one, that absolutely being my worst case scenario, to being so grateful that I had a cesarean with the surgical team that I had. They were fantastic. Immediately after my cesarean, when we went back into the room, I had a midwife help me get my baby to latch because I wanted to try breastfeeding. And he did. It was very cool, like how he could just kind of find his way there. We then had a rough time actually getting started with breastfeeding, but that first go went really well. And I couldn't believe how like he just knew what to do and knew where to go. It was very cool. I think somebody helped get him dressed. I don't know. I don't remember whether it was a midwife, whether it was my husband, but somebody got him dressed into the cute little outfit that we had put on the warming thing for him for when he was born. And then we spent a little bit of time on the labour ward there before they moved us back down to a room on the ward below. I don't actually know what that room was called, but it's where everyone goes once they've had their baby, and where I was prior to going up to the labour ward. It was the middle of summer. It was during the pandemic. We weren't allowed fans, so I didn't particularly like the room they put me back into because there was no airflow. And I had to sleep holding a fan, like a little handheld fan. That wasn't a good time. But I was very relieved to be in a reclining bed, I love that bed, with my baby, and all was well. They kept me in the hospital for a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, I can't remember exactly. During that time, I was checked multiple times. They checked my scar. They checked I could move about okay, which was really hard. They kept an eye on my baby, made sure that he was okay. I had a lactation consultant come in and try to explain to me how to go about breastfeeding. We were really struggling with that. I had to manually express colostrum into these syringes that we would then use to feed my baby. But we did keep trying to latch, and at one point I had a midwife come in and spend 45 minutes with me trying to get my little boy to latch on properly. And she had to step out of the room briefly at that 45-minute mark because she had been with me a while, and that was when he did it, and we didn't have a problem after that. The midwives on that ward were really helpful. Like I said, that one midwife came in and showed me how to breastfeed, how to get a good latch. Other midwives came in and helped us change his nappy when I was on my own and couldn't get out of bed, show us how to change a nappy. That was invaluable. Explain to me how to hand express, how to burp him. Basically, we used that time to learn from these people how to look after this tiny, tiny little newborn baby. He was so little, and they were a wonderful help. That said, it being so warm there because it was August and the pandemic meant they couldn't have fans, meant that the room was really, really unpleasant to stay in long term. So when they finally said I could go home, I was thrilled. I also cried because I couldn't take the reclining bed with me and I couldn't figure out how I was going to get in and out of bed. But I was thrilled to go home, and then we did. And that is the end of my birth story. So to quickly recap, I had a 4-day induction that didn't go well. I had some poor care, I had some fantastic care. I ended up having an emergency cesarean. And then after the whole thing, we got a beautiful baby boy, and I was fine, he was fine, Dada was fine. We were all a little traumatized, but everything went well in the end. So my thoughts on my birth a year on are, it's not what I would choose. It's not what I would choose again. But it is what it is. It's what I had. I no longer cry about it, so that's great. If I'd made this video immediately after my birth or within the first few months, I would have been in tears by now. So. But ultimately, it was a success. I have my baby boy, and that's good. That's the whole point. Now, while I would never, ever, ever have an induction again, it does work for some people. My sister-in-law had 2 inductions and they went exactly as they're supposed to. So it does work for some people. It just didn't work for me. And if they propose an induction for me another time, I would say no. Hell no. With a potential baby number 2, my plan is my original birth plan, with having a unmedicated water birth, or a cesarean with no in-between. I know exactly what I want going into it this next time. I feel like I have a much better understanding of what I can say no to, such as an induction. I actually saw something interesting online a while back that said, An induction is never urgent. And it actually really got me thinking, because if it is truly an emergency, wouldn't they suggest a cesarean because you need the most immediate results? So maybe I could have just waited. Food for thought. I don't know whether that's fully accurate or not, but it did get me thinking. I will also be refusing to have my heart monitored next time. I'll sign a waiver if they need me to, because I had 0 issues with it the whole time. I don't know yet whether I would be comfortable with home birth or if I want to be in the hospital again, but we will see. I've got lots of time to think about that because I'm not pregnant. So this is just hypotheticals. And now, having gone through my birth story, I would like to know your thoughts, either on my birth experience or on your experiences or the experience of someone you know. Like, let's have a little discussion about types of birth, how things went, whether you were happy with it, whether you weren't happy with it, whether you would be happy with a situation like mine, or if you think it was a bad one, or let's have a conversation. Alrighty, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening to my very long, rambled, somewhat fuzzy-brained recollection of my birth story. I hope I wasn't too negative during this, because I do feel pretty negatively about my birth experience, even though I have now accepted it. But that's the reality of it sometimes. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. Sometimes it is not a good time. But like I said, ultimately it was absolutely worth it. And I would do it again. Ideally not like that, but I would do it again. Alrighty, I will leave it there. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.